Hey everybody, welcome to the show. We are already having a pretty good time in the studio today. So excited to have you here at the Simplified Church podcast. I mean, we've got a great episode today that we're going to be getting into some pretty heavy, albeit somewhat philosophical conversation, but pretty heavy conversation around this idea of gospel centeredness and what does it actually look like? How do you go beyond the kind of the buzzwordy, Christianese idea of this and into something deeper? And so we're going to be getting into that today. But maybe we've already been laughing, having a little bit of fun, just joking around a little bit. It's just life's out here for bald men. Life out here for bald men's tough, guys. It's tough. Okay. And so we're working through the dynamics of that.
I mean, looking this good, it's hard work.
Man,
I mean, if you all are seeing what I'm seeing,
yeah.
I mean, wow. It's hard work to look this good.
That's a man with some self-confidence right there. The one and only Greg Braswell. Golly, I wish, man. It's like I feel like if y'all can see what I can see, then I'm sorry. That's how that's how I feel. It's like I have to apologize when I walk into a room.
You is smart. You is handsome. Gosh dang it, people like you.
Yeah, man. I think some of those are true, but I don't know if all three of those are true. And never at the same time. But anyway, Greg, how you doing, man? So good to be together today, buddy. What's up?
It is, man. It's a good day. It's a good Monday. And in the preacher world, that's a good thing. To have a good Monday.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's good. Things are blowing and going. Easter is going to be here before we know it.
Yep.
And so trying to kind of take a couple of deep breaths before we jump in, and do that. And so, yeah, things are really good. Things are really good.
Easter's crazy, dude. It's just hard for me to believe, to even get my mind wrapped around the fact that it just like, man, Christmas was just here, but it's one of those situations, right? Where like, it's one of those years, Easter is just early and that just kind of comes with the territory. But yeah, man, I'm excited. I always love Easter. It's a good time.
And spring training is upon us.
Teams are reporting.
They are. And so I'm excited about that. I filled out my paperwork. So the local ball club still offers a clergy pass around these parts.
How cool is that?
So I filled out my paperwork for that today. So hopefully get to sneak away and catch a couple of ball games this year. Hopefully my Cardinals are good. Last year they were awful.
There's only one way to go from here, bro. Yeah, it was rough out in St. Louis.
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
I don't remember it ever being quite this rough.
It was bad.
It was rough.
Yeah, I saw these Cardinals fans talking about like, oh man, just the club's falling apart. We don't know what's going on. We're not pitching. We're not hitting. And it's like, yeah, now you know what it's like to be a Reds fan. Welcome to the entire first part of the 2000s. Okay, for us, we had an interesting rally.
Yeah, y'all had a good year last year. All things considered,
it was actually a pretty strong year. It was kind of fun to watch, man. Just seeing this team bring about a level of cohesion, start having fun together, start believing in each other, and man, it's amazing how that can actually help you win games. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there across the board. Like, man, you talk about a valuable lesson even in ministry. And I know that's not what we're talking about today, but I mean, sometimes we spend so much time and energy focusing on all these solutions that we think are going to help us grow our ministries or impact our churches or just see numerical growth. And in reality, there's just something about teams coming together, enjoying their calling, enjoying what they get to do. Folks in the church rallying around each other and love and support and encouragement. And next thing you know, things start looking a lot like winning around there.
For sure.
So there's just an interesting kind of dynamic there that at least I got to see play out watching the Reds, and hopefully we'll get some of that this year, but I don't know. I don't know. It's being a Cincinnati fan is it's just rolling the dice the start of every season.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. But that's the thing that I love about baseball is 182 games. That's a long time.
It is.
And so lots can happen. And let's just be honest. As long as the Yankees don't win, and the Dodgers don't win, I'm okay.
Yeah. It is always good to watch a team rise and win that isn't one of these kind of standard teams. That's what I've loved so much about the just fall and demise of the Patriots. That's been so fun to watch. And now Belichick's out of a job. Like everything is everything's coming together. Though being without football does feel a lot like entering into it like a national nightmare. So trying to navigate that, waking up on a Sunday and no football to look forward to.
Well,
So
isn't like whatever the extension, like it's not XFL, but whatever it is, the Battle Hawks and the whoever, that weird league, doesn't that start here really soon?
It does start really soon. Yeah, there's going to be some. It's like a semi-professional arena kind of football that'll start up, and I'll probably catch a little bit of that here and there. But nothing is as good as the NFL, man.
Well, you're not wrong. I remember when the XFL first came out.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I
And there was a dude named He Hate Me. that was on the back of his jersey, and I thought,
yeah,
all right,
I
like this guy
because they ate me.
Yeah,
that's why. Me. Yeah, they can't all be winners, man. They got to play somewhere. Okay, guys, professional sports is hard. It's hard to get into, and there's some weirdo names in professional sports. So
you're not wrong.
No, some of them it's like, oh my gosh, if I had a name like that. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about, Greg. We got to pull together. We could spend the next. Yeah, trying to gotta get centered here. Speaking of getting centered, that's what we're talking about. That's a beautiful segue. We're talking about this idea of getting more gospel centered, developing a gospel centered culture in our churches. And I want to talk about this. I want to have this conversation, man, because I feel like this has become this ideal, this kind of buzzword, this picture that's been painted for a long time. And particularly in church planting movements, kind of those missional movements, you see a lot of this conversation. Churches that probably lean a little more on the liturgical side or lean a little more on the denominational side. You're hearing these conversations. For a long time, I kind of saw that, but now it just seems like this notion of gospel-centeredness is becoming more and more and more of a topic that pastors are having and conferences are having. These kind of cohorts coming together, having these conversations. And listen, hear me say, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think getting closer toward having the gospel of Jesus become the center of our churches and in our communities is never a bad thing. But I think it's one of those things where, like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And so I think it'd be kind of fun to get into this conversation today. Have you been seeing this trend? I mean, is this something that you've recognized? I mean, is this something that you hear and you're instantly comfortable with, or does it bring up questions for you?
So I think in part it depends on who it comes from. But yeah, it takes me back. As soon as you mentioned to me about this subject matter, my brain went back to, and I can't remember who wrote it. So somebody drop us a comment and tell me who wrote it. But Gospel Centered Student Ministry was a book, or Gospel Centered Youth Ministry was a book that came out when I was a youth guy.
Interesting.
However many decades ago, or at least it feels like however many decades ago. And so that popped into my brain. But I do think that you're 100% right that we are seeing this overwhelming push toward the gospel, but it always causes me to ask two questions.
Okay.
The first question is this: how are you defining that word?
Oh, that's good.
Because lots of people have lots of definitions of the gospel.
Okay.
I would argue that most of them are wrong.
Ooh,
I would argue that there really can only be one definition of the gospel.
Okay, name names. Who's getting it wrong? Let's get it. Let's call him out to the light, man. We'll drag him. He got ready to drop some names, and he's like, I can't do that. Yeah.
I don't know. I was listening to an audiobook the other day about Spurgeon, and I thought, ooh, he would do that. And then I thought, nah, no.
Yeah. He would. That dude didn't care, man.
That's right. He would have just taken him to the woodshed,
just firing arrows all day.
Nevertheless,
yeah.
You mentioned, at the outset of our conversation that it's the gospel of Jesus.
Yes.
I think sometimes we like to couch everything that the church does as the gospel, that everything that the church teaches is the gospel. Now, it all should be influenced and impacted by the gospel, but all of those things can't be the gospel.
Sure.
The gospel is the good news that Jesus came to live, to die, to be raised again so that sinners could be forgiven.
Come on.
That is the basis
Yeah.
of the gospel. That is the gospel boiled down to its most base form. And if that's not what we're saying, if that's not what we're meaning when we say gospel, then we're starting from a faulty spot.
Okay.
And it allows for us to then filter lots of things through the lens of, well, but I think that's gospel focused and gospel centered because it's morality, or it's it's scripture memory, or it's, and don't hear me saying
Yeah.
those things are bad, but is that what makes something gospel centered?
Yeah. I mean, even just focusing on like kind of controlling or modifying behavior
Exactly.
for a long time, I think was sold as gospel centered.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's interesting. So for you, the first question is like, all right, what do we mean when we say gospel? And then what's the second question?
Second question is, how is it impacting everything?
Oh,
Because if the gospel isn't impacting everything, then you really aren't going to be gospel centered. You can't get there. And so, like, is it the highest thing that your church is ever going to be about doing? Is clearly teaching and continuing to articulate, even to believers, what the gospel is.
yeah.
And I think there is a fear in a lot of churches and a lot of scenes that are either, yes, they're churches or they're parachurch, or but they have that strong background of Christian morality, Christian doctrine, those kind of things, of saying, I'm a little hairy to point someone toward a need for a savior,
Okay.
or I'm a little scared to push hard on calling out certain behaviors or whatever. And I think when you're saying, hey, we want to be gospel centered and we're going to be about the gospel has to shine through all of the other stuff. And it has to be the thing that then motivates everything else that you do. And I think that most of the people that are asking that question, or who are articulating and advocating for a gospel-centered ministry and a gospel-centered church, aren't willing to do that.
Yeah, it makes me wonder because I sometimes I feel like I hear in churches like, yeah, they're going to talk about Jesus and they're going to talk about inviting people to place their trust in Jesus and to get baptized. We don't talk, I just feel like there's this trend now where that we don't talk much about sin. We're not going to talk much about sin. We're not going to be honest about that we have sin and that sin is a problem, and that directly connected to that is the reality of eternal separation from God,
right,
in a place called hell. And so I feel like that.
Well, and there's no need for the gospel if there's not sin.
Right. Right. And so why are we not talking in the pursuit of being gospel centered? Why are churches not wanting to talk about sin? Why are churches not wanting to talk about hell, but are wanting to talk about Jesus? Does that make sense? Like, why do you think there's this tension between wanting to be attached to Jesus, but not to be honest in our complete assessment of who Jesus is?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent thing that we have to wrestle through and be willing to be honest and vulnerable about it. I think in part it's because we want the Jesus that makes us feel good. We want the gospel that that doesn't require me to admit that I can't do it on my own. We were talking in my small group this week just about that trend of I'm enough. I don't know if you've seen that trend.
Yeah,
on
man,
social media. I'm enough.
It's all over the place.
I'm enough.
Yeah.
I'm not enough.
Yeah.
I am 100% lacking and found wanting when it comes to my sinfulness and my desperate need for Jesus.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's trying to placate the culture. I don't know if it's just overwhelming anxiety and fear it may be different for each church and each pastor, but I think that's part of it. It's that we are terrified to have to develop and to push back against that I'm enough.
Mm.
That is just so rampant. And the gospel says you're not enough.
Yeah.
But Jesus is enough. And that's great news. But we fall prey to the fear, I think, more than anything. And I don't know that we know what the actual costs of being gospel centered really is.
Yeah, I think there can be pretty significant costs to a church wanting to adopt a more authentic, a more honest pursuit of being gospel centered. I feel like that maybe there's been this overcorrection. And again, man, some of this is just like a matter of perspective, because some folks might be listening and saying, dude, whatever you're talking about, like, yeah, maybe on TV or some of these kind of weirdo churches that are out there. But by and large, in my community, I'm not seeing that at all. Or in my tradition, that's not been my case whatsoever. But there seems to be a growing trend, at least if you're allowing things to play out through, some sort of lens, at least on social media or, in kind of some of these viral sensations. But there seems to be a growing pattern, a trend of churches just saying, yeah, we do recognize that we need Jesus, but it's that if we push too far on the fact that we're not enough, then we enter into a place of legalism. And man, just we fought so hard to get away from legalism, because legalism makes it feel a lot like that. There's nothing good about you, that there's nothing redeemable about you, that the fact that God even knows your name is just miraculous in and of itself. And so maybe there's this pattern and desire to push away from that and try to bring about this middle ground that says, like, yeah, well, yeah, we've made mistakes. We're all broken, but Jesus is here to fix us. And it doesn't still address the problem of sin. It doesn't really give an honest assessment, because I've heard that a lot in church over the years, man.
Yep.
It's just like, man, we're all broken. We all make mistakes. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's 100%. Like that is a result of our fallen nature. But I don't just make mistakes. I sin. I grieve God. I've broken his holy law.
Our mistakes didn't put Jesus to death.
Right.
Our sin did.
Yeah.
And I think that is the overwhelming issue. And I think because we can't easily and evenly articulate the gravity of sin.
Yeah, it's hard. It's tough to do, man.
Yeah, like I don't have it figured out. Like I don't know how to do it right every time. And then when you play against it, then those things that are hot button sin issues,
right,
versus the things that they're still sin, but they are much them. Right. And so how do we walk that out? Well, how come like y'all are always against this, but sometimes you seem to be okay with that?
Yeah.
And so I get all of those things are pulling and pushing at this idea, and how we get to that spot to say, yeah, we are all wretched sinners deserving of hell, yet God in his infinite kindness saw fit to send Jesus, his perfect son, to live and to die in our place, to be raised to life again, so that our sin debt could be paid. Not our mistakes, not our oopses,
right?
But our sin debt could be paid. And how do we get to a spot where we're elevating that and we're continuing to preach that and make that that ability to communicate that information? How do we make that the central point of everything that we do in the life of our church?
Yeah, I think that's super helpful, man. Even just to bring that kind of clarity to it, and I like that. I mean, I the one of the things I really appreciate about the church that we're a part of is that we see this desire, we see this tension of trying to be more gospel centered and chasing after that. I don't think you get. Yeah, I think we have to be careful to frame it as something you arrive at, where it's just like, oh man, no, we're actually gospel centered. Like we got there, we figured it out, and we're just kind of living in this lane. I think it's one of those kind of long term pursuances of, are we gospel centered? Yeah. Could we get more gospel centered? Yeah. But I really appreciate that, because I will hear the gospel preached on a Sunday. I will hear this invitation to die to self so that Christ might live. And I think that's super encouraging. And I've noticed that just some churches, man, and it just, for whatever reason, there's a fear of that. There's a fear of pushing for that because maybe that, hey, it's going to cost us people, it's going to cost us opportunity. And so we're just going to kind of live in this watered down idealism. But it's something that you kind of said that made me think, like, how do we boil this down to a very simple understanding? Because I'll be honest, I've wrestled with that. Like, I understand conceptually, philosophically, I understand exactly what we're talking about. Like, yes, we've got to make sure that the true gospel message is at the center of what we're doing, and that it's presented regularly in all of our environments, whether it's kids or students or whatever. We've got to make sure that we're being authentic about that, and that we're keeping it out front. But what is that like? What is the strategy for that? Like, how does the church say, all right, we want to move more gospel centered? Totally agree. Maybe we've not been doing a good job of that. Strategically, how do we do that? And something that you said kind of hit for me, that every church has a center, right? Every church has a heartbeat, just like people. I believe this to be true. I believe churches are a lot like human beings, not in that we're comprised of them, but that they function very similarly. And at the center of every human being is the lifeblood. It's the heartbeat. But every church has a center too. And I think that at the center of a church is one of two identities. It's one of two heartbeats. It's a church that says that that the gospel, the gospel message is at the center, or I'm at the center. People that are our ideas, the way that we think, what we believe is best, is at the center. And almost being like gospel centered versus being me centered, if that makes sense. And I feel like that's how we begin to identify a strategy moving forward, is first identifying what's at the center. And so, for instance, like if you think about the preaching in a church, the teaching in a church, that kind of stuff, what's at the center? Is it that the gospel is the answer, or that, we're the answer?
Right.
That philosophy is the answer. Psychology is the answer.
Where we have moved from the gospel to moral therapeutic deism.
Yes.
In all things.
Yes. It provides, there's an assessment that can be made there.
And I think that has been the struggle, I think, in church life for at least the last 20 years, if not longer, is balancing and figuring out what is it that we're doing? Are we pushing people toward Jesus?
Yeah.
Or are we simply pushing them toward a higher power?
That's good, man.
And I know that seems maybe overly harsh and overly simplified, but I think that there are lots of times when I can walk out of church, that I've been in churches where I can walk out and I can say, I'm not sure that there was enough there for me to determine whether they were talking about Jesus, or, the God of the Bible, or just some higher power.
Sure.
And that is terrifying, that's the place that we live. But I think at the same time, we have to ensure, that we are in every opportunity preaching the gospel, not simply for lives to be transformed through the act of salvation. Yeah, that's important. Yeah, that's something that should be part of our goal and our objective. But even still, week after week, month after month, year after year, getting up and proclaiming the gospel for the good of believers.
Oh man, for sure.
Is huge.
Yeah.
And so how are we preaching the gospel to ourselves? And how are we preaching the gospel to our people, so that they can then take and preach the gospel to the people that are near them? And so, being able to say it's not just about, we tacked on telling somebody how they can know Jesus at the end of preaching time, or we tacked on the end of youth group that, hey, y'all are a bunch of wretched punks, so you need to know Jesus. Like, that may be true.
With your baggy pants and your skateboards
That's right. That's right.
and your Satan music.
That's right. Your Jinko jeans.
Jinko jeans. Oh my gosh. So everyone under 30 listening right now, Jinko is a brand of jeans that just looked like you were wearing two large denim tents on your legs.
That's right. But everybody had to have them.
Everybody had to have them. It was an unfortunate, but I tell you what, wherever you walked, that floor was clean. I tell you what, it just, man, like two big, just giant dust mops hanging off your calves. But I think you're right, man. Like that's it is so easy to do. Like, all right, well, we're gonna do our church thing, and then we're gonna add this invitation to know Jesus kind of at the end, and it becomes like this little rhythm, this kind of habit that we develop, where it's everything else we talked about today was pretty well, void of Jesus and the gospel, but we're gonna add this little moment here at the end. Whereas I think what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, is looking at everything we do as a means to point people back to that message, point people to Jesus, and how to practically live out the call of Jesus in our lives from every facet, from every corner. And that is not an easy transition to make. It's not an easy move to make.
No.
But it's critical in the life of your church. I think it's really easy for churches to be very spiritual. Like we can be very religious and we can be very spiritual and we can dress it up. We can doll it up. We can make it sound very attractive. And it can feel very freeing. It can be liberating for folks. And the reality is there are a lot of churches that are very religious. They're very benevolent and they're very activity focused. Like they're doing a lot of things. They're helping a lot of people. And the content sounds very spiritual, but it does not contain the gospel. And that is a terrifying reality that these churches exist.
Yeah. Or it's at least at best an afterthought.
Yes. Or an afterthought, man.
And it's hard. And I was there for a very long time.
Okay.
Like as far as like, when I was a youth guy teaching every week, okay, yeah, we've got nothing, like what we're talking about doesn't really have anything to do with Jesus. But let's make a beeline for Jesus right now.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
And invite people to respond when nothing else that we've been doing has been about the things that would display and describe the gospel. And so, yeah, trying to make sure that as you are developing and crafting what you're going to say, how does that point people toward Jesus? How does that display the gospel, even if you're in the Old Testament, or even if you're in an obscure passage in the New Testament that's not directly just screaming the saving work of Jesus. How do we connect those dots for people? How does talking about missions connect that dot for people? In the world that I live in, how does every song that we sing point people toward the gospel?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that every song and that every sermon has to be just so gospel saturated that you don't ever have to kind of work at it a little bit to get there and to get it crafted well, where, okay, I see how it all connects. You can talk about the fatty part of the lobe in Leviticus and you can still find a way to rightly connect the dots to connect it to the gospel and our desperate need for a savior.
Coming up on next week's episode is Craig's idea for sermon series topics.
Exactly.
So, that fatty lobe, man.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned, folks. You're all on the edge of your seats.
I bet you could write some Valentine's Day cards, man. Hey, girl. Hey, girl. Let me see that lobe. I don't disagree with you, dude. I do think you can. I think this is a pendulum that you could easily go so far one way, where like we have a little bit of teaching about this one particular topic, but then it just like derails because we got to make it sure it all goes to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and and living a life eternity. man, it's like, okay, there's ways to always connect it. And even like in our small group environments or Bible study environments, you can like as a church study whatever you want to study, talk about whatever you want, but then just have somebody ask the question like, man, how does what we're talking about, like, how does that make you see Jesus differently? How does that impact your understanding of what he's done for us in the gospel? Like you can ask that question and help draw it back. You can help get people there. And I like when churches handle this rightly in a way that makes sense and not in a way that it becomes so inaccessible for people, where it's like, man, that just doesn't even make sense for me. Or I don't understand what you're saying, but I think in kind of 4 areas, if we're talking about a strategy, I think first and foremost is for churches to spend some time assessing, looking at the things that you're doing, looking at the things that you're saying, and asking the question: are we pointing people back to Jesus in a consistent way, where everything connects to the gospel and we understand the redemptive thread that's kind of woven throughout Scripture and then now is alive and well in the modern church? Or are we not? Are we just making this a whatever, and then we're adding Jesus on the end?
Right.
And that was a bonus thing.
That was really Criswillian of you, man. I appreciate you working that in.
You like that?
I like that. That.
Every once in a while, I make Greg happy, and then I'm happy. Wow. You know what? We're just going to end it right here. I don't want to mess the rest of this up because I had some other stuff, but I'm afraid now.
Okay? Now lay it on us. I
got to go out on a high note. But I think, strategically, we start with that assessment, right? I think that's really good. And I think this is a group conversation. I don't know if this is a one-person conversation, because people may have a perspective. Like I really, man, the church my family and I are at, we believe that we see this happening. Like we see people talking about Jesus and talking about the gospel and talking about the need for redemption and where that plays out in people's lives. We see that connected in the message series that we're in. And I love that. I love seeing that. But I would love to see what other people have to say. I'd love to get into a conversation about that. But I think this is a group conversation to see how people are experiencing this notion of gospel centrality. But I think once you get past the assessment part, man, I think it's 4 things, and I would love to get your kind of thoughts on this as we land the plane. Right. But I think it's 4 ways that your church can really kind of develop a gospel-centered culture, or at least a pursuit of it. Is first and foremost is making sure that it impacts your teaching and preaching. That, listen, everything that happens in Scripture, to your point, it's a short walk, man. It's not a far journey to get to the redemptive nature of God through Christ. I think also it needs to affect how we think about spiritual formation. And so how are we wanting to grow people in the gospel through these various things that we're trying to do in Bible studies, in men's and women's events, student events, children's ministry? When we think about spiritual formation, right? Like whether it's going deeper into like DNA groups and that kind of stuff. I think it plays out in how we think about forming authentic community in our groups and our relationships, reminding people that the thing that unites you more than anything else in the world is the fact that we all deserve death and hell forever. And I think it's important that we start with that, which is not like, that's not like a great way to get people to come to like a small group kickoff and be like,
do you deserve death and hell? Come to my small group.
Me too. Let's hang out. That's probably not like the thing you put on the flyer, but I think there's this recognition that, like, man, what unites us is far deeper and far more scary than the fact that we've got like common struggles and common cultural connections. But I think the gospel needs to influence our communities, because that's what will create actual growth. It's not affinity, but actual like understanding the need for Jesus and how we can help each other in that. And then lastly is it needs to impact how we reach out to our communities, how we do our missions, things like that. So just laying that lens of gospel centrality over kind of these 4 primary pillars that churches stand on, pretty much across the board, every church, right? And asking those questions, like, how's the gospel impacting that? So that would, to me, feels like strategically a way to move forward toward the pursuit of gospel centrality. But what say you, my man? Like, does that check out? Is there something I'm missing?
No, I think you're right on. And I think you mentioned it earlier. The big piece of that puzzle is also not just those 4 questions and those 4 lenses to be looking at, but to consistently be looking through those lenses.
That's true. Yeah.
Because you don't ever arrive there.
No, you're right.
Like there's always reassessment, and there's always a way that you could be more gospel centered and gospel focused. And as you walk down and you reach new people and you do new ministry things and you bring new people on your team and all of those things are not only going to shift what you're doing or not doing, but they're also going to change some perspectives and some perceptions. And so you got to go back and, okay, we got to reevaluate again. We've got to see, are we really doing these things? How is the gospel impacting this and this and this and this? And if it's not, how do we do it? And know that it's going to be a long-term commitment.
Yeah.
Not just okay, well, we'll do this for a while and then we'll do something else.
Yeah. It's a course correction.
Absolutely.
And I think in all areas of ministry, it's a course correction. It's not an easy one.
No.
But I think just sometimes, you might even hear something like this and be like asking the question, like, man, what's the big deal? Like, man, we're talking about Jesus. Like, we're talking about these things. Like, yeah, but it's more than just talking about this is a strategy for how we're to move forward. And I think here's the reason why. I think in the end, spirituality fades because it becomes challenged. And I think people abandon the philosophy of spirituality when they eventually find something that they feel like works better for them. I think religion fades because it becomes obsolete in the face of difficulty, in the face of pressure and challenges of life. And it eventually can't support the weight of it. The gospel doesn't. The gospel is the thing that I think keeps people coming back year after year after year after year. I think the gospel is what keeps people in church long after they've graduated high school, what brings them back after seasons of disobedience and struggle. The gospel is what brings them out, and it brings them back. And so I think planting deep seeds of the gospel in all that we do is how you get the best possible yield long term.
Yeah. If
that makes sense.
For sure.
And I just think that's the reason why. So if you're listening and you're like, all right, man, like, what's the big deal? Like, that's the big deal. It truly is what matters in the end. Not only does it honor Jesus super well, but like I think it's a huge ROI
sure.
At the end of the day. But yeah, I think this is a really good conversation, man. I think this is an important conversation, one that we'll probably revisit in the future, thinking about, more strategically too, like how do we help pastors think about that. But listen, this everyday pastors that are out there on the grind, especially if you're bivocational, you've already got so much on your plate. Like these are the realities that we face on a normal day. If you're busy, if you got things going on, but I think this is a great stepping stone, a great opportunity to get people in your circle, on your leadership team, folks that you trust, around a table and just start talking and having these kind of conversations and see where it goes next. But we support you. We believe in everyday pastors. We believe in what you're doing. And it's exciting to be a part of this. One of the things that we do at Simplify Church is go beyond just resourcing you with some of these conversations and ideas and topics in your ministry, but we also try to make sure ministry is easy for you. We try to simplify your ministry. And one of the ways we do that is through bookkeeping, through online giving, through making sure that all of your bills are paid and checks are written and sent out to all of your vendors and folks that you're accountable to. And we can do all of that. I mean, I'm not going to say that we are the experts in everything as it relates to church bookkeeping, but I am going to say that we're the experts because we are, man. Like, this is what we do. It's what we're good at. It's what we're passionate about. And we believe in, especially coming around, pastors at smaller churches, pastors that are busy, and just try to help you simplify. And so we'd love to talk to you more about that. You can head to our website, simplifychurch.com. Love to set up a time to give you a quote and talk about your needs and how we can come alongside and just really make bookkeeping done for you, and unleash your church to be more focused on the things that matter, stuff that you're called to, instead of worried about, printing out budget reports and making sure all of your reconciliations are taken care of and the 9 receipts you lost from the people you took out to lunch this past week, but ensuring that you have everything you need to be successful. So this is what we're here for. We love you, pastors. We're praying for you, and we'll be back with you next week. See ya.